Scotland, 1542, was a hard time to live in and just as hard to rule. The leading world power at the time was the Roman Catholic Church, which at the time was in the middle of its period of Inquisition, which would later include the infamous Spanish Inquisition. The Catholic Church had many powerful people in all levels of government, and they were a force you did not want to be on the wrong side of. By the 15th century, there was a reformation of religion going on. There were people in countries that were breaking from Rome and changing to the Protestant religion. However, this also had its consequence. If you did not belong to the Catholic Church, you were executed for heresy. The Protestant and Catholic churches would have a great impact on Mary Stuart's whole life and reign in Scotland, France, and England. This impact even started before she was born. Most everyone knows that King Henry VIII of England was obsessed with having a male heir. Well, that and giving his wives a pine box for a wedding present. He was also a tyrant and someone you did not disobey. Because of this obsession, he eventually broke off from the Catholic Church to make England a Protestant nation, making him the head of the Church of England. This would allow him to get the divorce he wanted from Catherine of Aragon, to marry the by this time pregnant Anne Boleyn, who would give birth to Mary's cousin Elizabeth Tudor, aka Elizabeth I of England, and then have Anne beheaded 3 years later so he could marry Jane Seymour, who would finally give Henry the male heir he so desired, and then she died 12 days later from infection. Since Henry fell out of favor with Rome, he feared there would be repercussions of invasions from other countries such as Scotland, France, and Spain. Henry wanted his nephew James Stuart of Scotland to break off from the Catholic Church as well. But James, who married a French and very stalwart Catholic woman married to Guise, would not do as Henry wanted. James would not even meet with Henry at York to discuss the issue. Henry, ever the tyrant, became angry with James for his disobedience and attacked Scotland. James versus Henry. The Battle of Solway-Moss was a disaster for the Scots. The Scots army had 18,000 men to the English 3,000. How the heck do you lose a battle when you outnumber your enemy by 15,000 men? James had Lord Maxwell command the army till they got to the English border. James then tells his favorite right-hand man, Sir Oliver Sinclair, in secret, "Hey, I don't trust Lord Maxwell, so when you get into England, you take over the army." James started out with the army, made it as far as Lochmaben Castle when he became ill. He remained behind at Lochmaben Castle to start, and then he withdrew to his favorite Falkland Palace to continue recovering. The army marched on, as James had instructed. When they crossed over into England, Sinclair told Maxwell, "Hey, per the king, I'm taking over." Well, you can guess what happened from that point. The ranks split, the army fell apart like a shattered stained glass window in a church. Classic command breakdown. The English capitalized on the breakdown and attacked. The actual casualties of the war were actually very few, about 20 Scots and about 7 English. Most of the fatalities came from the Scots trying to retreat back across the River Est, where they ended up drowning. And some went into the bog next to the river to hide, which gives the battle its name of Solway-Moss. About 1,200 Scots were captured by the English, including Maxwell and Sinclair. By the time James had heard about the loss of the battle and Sinclair, his fever from dysentery had become worse. Meanwhile, back at Linlithgow Palace, Mary de Guise was preparing for an event of her own, the birth of her child. On a cold 8th of December 1542, Mary was born. The news of Mary's birth was conveyed to James at Falkland Palace. When James heard it was a girl, legend has it he said, "Oi, it came with ye lass, it'll gang with ye lass," meaning he thought the Stuart dynasty would end with his daughter. He was half right. It did end with a girl, but not his daughter. It ended in 1714 with Queen Anne. Gee, Thanks, Dad, for having a vote of confidence in me. I just got here and I failed you already. How nice. 6 days later, on the 14th of December, 1542, James said, "I'm out of this life." He never saw his daughter. And so it begins. At 6 days old, Mary became Queen of Scots. After Mary was born, she and Scotland became a prize to be won. Both England and France wanted her to marry one of their princes, either Prince Edward VI of England or the Dauphin Francois of France, with control of Scotland being the much-wanted bonus. England and France were also fighting with each other, the ever-ongoing Catholic versus Protestant conflict. Scotland would be the advantage country for both England and France for conquering each other. Henry wanted to destroy the old alliance Scotland had with France, and he was angered that the Treaty of Greenwich, signed the 1st of July, 1553, where the Scots agreed that Mary Stuart would marry Henry's son, Edward VI, had been rejected. Sorry, mate, we were pulling for you. Well, not really. Henry's invasion of Scotland would be known to history as the Rough Wooing, or 9 Years' War. Since the Scots rejected his Treaty of Greenwich, Henry decided he was going to force the Scots to change their mind about his son marrying their infant queen. And we all know that Henry knows how to woo women. About that. On the 7th of May, 1544, Henry burns down the capital city of Edinburgh. During many of the border raids that the English were conducting on the Scottish southern border, the English troops ran into Scottish troops at Ancre Moor on the 27th of February, 1545. The English suffered heavy losses. The wind that day was on the side of the Scots. The wind blew the smoke from the cannons in the direction of the English, making a smokescreen for the Scots, giving them the advantage of surprise. The English had a hard time due to the uneven and boggy ground. It was a needed victory for the Scots, but it did not win the overall war. It increased Henry's military action against the Scots. Henry VIII died in January 1547. The Duke of Somerset, Edward Seymour, uncle to Henry's son, the now King Edward VI, and ruling as Lord Protector, continued the 9 Years' War Henry started. The rough wooing was about to get rougher. On the 10th of September 1547, the main action of the Battle of Pinkie Cleugh near Musselburgh commenced. Artillery from both sides were now in action, including cannons from the English ships that were lying offshore. With the Scots being bombarded from three sides, they were unable to respond to the English, and the Scots began to crumble. The Scots' losses were around 16,000 unconfirmed to the English 500. The Battle of Pinkie Cleugh was a catastrophic slaughter of the Scots army. The Treaty of Haddington was signed in 1548 between France and Scotland. It promised Mary to the Dauphin Francois in marriage in return for the French assistance with the siege of Haddington. Even though the Battle of Pinkie Cleugh was a huge win for the English, it did not move them much closer to their aim. Seymour devised a new plan. The English would build several forts across the east side of Scotland. They could then ride out to the towns around the forts and try to convince the people that marrying the Queen to Edward VI would be the best option. Haddington was a prime spot of the English occupation of Scotland, and the fort they made there was their flagship fort. The siege of Haddington started on the 1st of July, 1548. With the help of the French, the Scots army bombarded the fort. For 2 months, both sides had at it. There was cannon fire both day and night, but the fort did not fall. Due to the design of the fort, it made it extremely hard to take. Seymour figured if the English could keep Haddington, then they could win Scotland. However, with the strength of the fort, the cost of the war increased. By this time, the English knew Mary was now in France, and the chances of her marrying Edward VI were becoming very slim. Seymour lost his popularity, and a month later he was overthrown by his own lords. During all the wooing, Mary was moved to different locations for her safety. She started out at Stirling Castle, After the defeat of Pinkie Cleuth, Mary and her mother moved to Inchmahome Priory on an island in Lake Menteith, just a few hours' ride from Stirling. They stayed there for 3 weeks in the autumn of 1547. Then Mary and her mother, Mary de Guise, moved back to Stirling and spent one last Christmas together. By February 1548, Mary was moved to Dumbarton Castle to the west. She stayed at Dumbarton Castle till the 7th of August 1548. On that day, and at the ripe old age of 5 years old, Mary said goodbye to her mother and her kingdom of Scotland. With 4 other girls all about Mary's age and all named Mary, Marys Seton, Beaton, Fleming, and Livingston, all sailed down the Clyde and headed to France. Mary Stuart left her mother and her kingdom of Scotland to go to France, where she would eventually be betrothed to Francois II of France. All of these wars and events were done to try and win an infant queen's hand in marriage so they could control her country. No wonder why the queen is the most powerful piece on a chessboard. But to win the game, you have to capture the king. Mary landed at Roscoff near Lyon of Brittany 6 days after leaving down the Clyde. A few miles from Saint Germain, Mary arrived to take her place in the French royal nursery. She met with the French royal family, and she and Francois became fast friends right from the time she landed in France. Mary's Catholic family was very powerful in France and with the court, and had a big influence in Mary's life. On the 19th of April, 1558, in the Great Hall at the Louvre in Paris, Francois and Mary were formally betrothed. At Notre Dame Cathedral on the 24th of April, 1558, Mary, 15, and the Dauphin, 14, were married. The color which Mary had chosen for her dress was white. It was her favorite color. The train and the dress were very heavily beaded. Even by today's standards, this would still be quite the dress. On a sunny day, you would need sunglasses to look at her because the dress shimmered so much. In 16th century France, this would have been a particularly audacious color choice. White was considered the color of mourning for the royal family. Contrary to popular belief, Queen Victoria was not the first to wear a white wedding dress. Philippa of England was the first recorded princess to wear a white dress. Mary, Queen of Scots, was the first high-profile bride to wear a white dress. Queen Victoria was the one who made it popular. And there you go, a brief origin history on the white wedding dress. Yay! Moving on. November 1558, Mary Tudor, or Bloody Mary as she was known to history, passed away in England. The Catholics felt that Mary Stuart should be the next rightful Queen of England instead of Elizabeth. Henry II of France claimed the English throne on Mary's behalf. They even quartered the English coat of arms to Mary's already France and Scotland. They also titled Mary as Queen of England. Elizabeth was made aware of the quartering of the arms and the French court calling Mary Stuart the Queen of England. Elizabeth felt she was the rightful Queen of England since she was Henry VIII's daughter, regardless if she was Catholic or Protestant. In the eyes of today's modern times, she is correct, but in the 15th century, religion and Mary's claim to the English throne was a perennial thorn in the relationship between the two queens. Religion ultimately caused a life of fear and anxiety in one, and death for the other. After a serious jousting injury, Henry II of France dies. On the 10th of July, 1559, Francois II became King of France and Consort of Scotland. Mary became Queen Consort of France, Queen of Scotland. 1560 was a hard year for Mary. On the 11th of June, 1560, Mary's mother, Mary de Guise, passed away at the age of 44 in Edinburgh. The court did not tell Mary Stuart for some weeks. When they did tell her the news, it hit her hard. To add to her grief, on the 5th of December 1560, her husband Francois II had passed away. Mary was now a dowager queen, widow, at 18. Queen Elizabeth decided to take advantage of Mary's grieving and brought up the Treaty of Edinburgh. In a sense, it said that both English and French troops were to withdraw from Scotland and for Mary to give up her claim to the English throne. Mary stated that the quartering of her arms with England was a command to her from Henry II of France. When she became a widow, she no longer quartered her arms, nor did she use the title Queen of England. However, she did not ratify the Treaty of Edinburgh. Mary wanted to meet with Elizabeth to discuss the treaty, but Elizabeth would not welcome nor give safe passage through England to Mary. Mary had a choice to either remain in France as a dowager queen or to return to Scotland to take up her rule. Before Mary left France, she became ill, which delayed her return to Scotland. Since Elizabeth would not grant her safe passage, Mary changed her plans and decided not to go through England to Scotland. She would sail straight to Scotland, and she did not need permission from Elizabeth for safe passage. On the 14th of August, 1561, Mary left Calais for Scotland. With a very heavy heart, Mary said, "Adieu, adieu, Monsieur de France," repeatedly. She was at the stern of the ship for as long as she could see the coast of France.
Here are the steps for the Queen. She's coming off the boat.
That you are Queen would be known if the world were stripped of subjects. The very trees and frozen mountains would bow down to you, Your Majesty.
I can well imagine. Body of me, I could wish the clouds would stoop less to their queen in my native land.
Tuesday morning, the 19th of August, 1561, Mary landed in Leith. She was warmly welcomed by her people even though she arrived early. She stayed in town for a bit while Holyrood Palace was being made ready for her. Mary was well aware of the situation in Scotland between the Catholics and Protestants before she returned. By this time, Scotland had turned predominantly Protestant. Having a queen that was a different religion than the rest of the country was rare. The Catholic Church, Spain, and France wanted Mary to turn Scotland back to a Catholic country. Mary did not do this. She did give her people a form of religious freedom. They could worship Protestantism, and she would worship Catholicism in private. Some Catholics did not like Mary's choice. They felt she let them down by not returning Scotland to being a Catholic country. Well, you can't please everyone. John Knox, the head of the Protestant Reformation in Scotland, created a lot of havoc for Mary. They could never come to a meeting of the minds. Knox was not a fan of queens ruling countries. He felt that Mary Stuart would do what her mother, Mary de Guise, and Mary Tudor did: burn heretics. Mary Stuart did not. Aside from that, her religious freedom did help her in ruling the country. Under Mary's and Elizabeth's reign, people in their kingdoms generally did not have to worry so much about being flogged or burned at the stake for their religion as people in other countries in Europe did. Were there still religious contentions in their respective countries? Yes, but neither of the two queens went out of their way to execute people like Mary Tudor did. Religious persecution is not limited to just the Reformation in Mary's and Elizabeth's time. It is still going on around the world to this very day. Outside of all the religious headaches going on, people did do other things during the Reformation. People actually played games and had good times. Whoa! I know. Shocking. Mary, like other monarchs, had a love of sports. She liked hawking, or falconry. She liked hunting, horseback riding, tennis, playing music, dancing, things that normal people do even today. She also enjoyed playing a game called pall-mall, or mallet ball. Pall-mall is much more closely related to golf than croquet, as the objective was to whack the ball some distance with as few strokes as possible towards the target hoop. When close to the hoop, according to the luthier rules, the striking implement was changed to a shaft with a spoon-like end for hoiking the ball through the hoop, adapted more for accuracy and less for power, like the putter in a game of golf. Mary also loved to adopt male costume and have a little fun, incognito, as adventurous royals do at times, and this also allowed her to get an idea of what her people thought of her. As time went on, Mary began to feel the burden of ruling a country was becoming too much for her to bear, especially a country where people's loyalties were as flexible as water and would change depending on their mood from one moment to the next. Some were even loyal to Elizabeth and little to Mary, including Mary's half-brother James, who was born on the wrong side of the blanket. He was regent of Scotland and head of government with Mary's mother while Mary was in France. He was going to stay head of government at all cost, flexible loyalties and all. Mary also felt that she was almost destitute of friends. At the age of 21 years, Mary felt she needed a strong husband to help her rule her country. In walks one Henry Stuart Lord Darnley from England. They are first cousins once removed. Mary enjoyed Darnley's company at first and showed no outward appearance of passion for him. Then in April of 1565, Darnley became ill with all the symptoms of secondary syphilis, which is believed he caught in England. While nursing him back to health, Mary had become recklessly and totally in love, and her feelings for Darnley turned overwhelmingly physical. This is not good. Sir Nicholas Throckmorton, ambassador for Elizabeth for France and Scotland, was sent from the court of Elizabeth to try and dissuade Mary from the disastrous course of marrying Darnley. It was Elizabeth who sent Darnley to Mary in the first place. Elizabeth knew he was reckless, spoiled, had no common sense, and a prig. Was she planning Mary's downfall? Some people were. Her reason for sending Throckmorton is unclear. Mary also knew that her claim to the English throne would be strengthened if she married Darnley. He knew it as well. Mary was in no state to listen to advice from any counselor. Love was truly rampant in her heart for the first time. She could hear no other voice except the dictates of her own passionate feelings. Darnley did his best to woo Mary. He wanted that crown firmly planted on his head. You guessed it, soon it was wedding time at Holyrood Palace. On the 29th of July, 1565, Henry and Mary were wed. Oh, now they sound like they're having a nice time. A wedding. Always a good reason to spend lots of money, invite your best mates over, and have a party. The blissful marriage lasted at least long enough for Mary to conceive her first child. Meanwhile, Darnley's ego went bananas with the style of King Consort. King Consort was not good enough, though. He wanted the crown matrimonial, so he would be king in his own right if Mary died without issue. Mary's response to Henry having the crown matrimonial survey said, "Yes! You tell him, Mary. That git's ego is big enough." The lords knew, and who didn't, that Darnley wanted the crown matrimonial. They hatched a plan where they told Darnley that they would promise him the crown matrimonial if he would help them retain the Protestant religion and arrange Rizzio's murder. Darnley agreed. No surprise there. Darnley also wanted the murder to take place in front of Mary, hoping she would miscarry and die from the shock. Of course, the lords were never going to give Darnley the crown. They just wanted to implicate Darnley in the murder and, by association, Mary. On the 9th of March, 1566, Darnley and the lords went into Holyrood Palace to the Northwest Tower, where Mary, who is 6 months pregnant at this time, was having dinner with Rizzio and her ladies-in-waiting.
Elizabeth was so demanding of the gentleman's affection, he dared be reconciled with his own wedded wife for fear of the royal anger.
Why are you here?
If it please your majesty, let Davy Rizzio come out of this privy chamber where he has hidden too long.
It is by my command that he is here.
He has offended your honor.
Your mind is full of fantasies. You have a fever. Escort Lord Riven away and lock the doors.
Table flip!
Save me!
Rizzio, kill him!
Meanwhile, the rest of the lords were stabbing Rizzio. They stabbed him 56 times and then threw his body over the balustrade to the floor below. With Mary watching, the event did not quite have the desired effect on Mary they thought it would. She remained as calm as one can in that situation. The lords told her that she would be a prisoner. Mary knew she needed to leave the room before her feelings betrayed her. She at least gave them part of what they wanted. She feigned labor, which allowed her to leave the room and be in private to come up with an escape plan.
The king is there alone, but the outer door is guarded. We must escape tonight or we are lost. And we must take my husband with us, or the lords will use him to seize the crown. Madam, how? I must make that traitor my husband into a double traitor.
Mary and Darnley escaped Holyrood Palace with the help of Bothwell. Mary made the 29-mile ride on horseback and 6 months pregnant from Holyrood Palace to Dunbar Castle on the East Coast. Not an easy ride. Exhausted as she was, her spirits were good when she got there and the next morning. Mary then returned with troops to Edinburgh and successfully took back the city. She forced the conspirators into exile. Again, some ran to England and Elizabeth. She could not charge Darnley with the murder without endangering the legitimacy of her unborn child. For the next 3 months, Mary moved to Edinburgh Castle since it was safer than Holyrood. On the 19th of June 1566, after a very long, difficult, and painful labor, Mary gave birth to her firstborn son, James VI of Scotland. After James was born, Mary was so exhausted it was all she could do to whisper as she spoke to the English ambassador. Mary rested till July at Edinburgh, guns fired from Edinburgh Castle announcing the birth. Darnley was now out of favor with the court more than ever, and with a son, Darnley moved down 1 spot in the line of succession.
Queen of Scots is lighter of a fair son. I am but barren stock.
Elizabeth wasn't exactly happy either about Mary's news of being lighter of a fair son. Mary, from her teens on, had a sensitive constitution which she inherited from her parents. Mary was known to have bouts of severe depression and at times bouts of hysterical fits. She would also from time to time get abdomen pains in her right side. Mary had a few maladies that she suffered from throughout her life. Some experts suggest that it was a gastric ulcer, some porphyria. No one really knows for sure. The birth of James had a big impact on Mary's life, and not just her health. Since the Catholic Church believed that divorce was pretty much an abomination, and an annulment would declare the marriage never happened, both would make James to be considered illegitimate, just as the Catholics thought that Elizabeth was illegitimate. Mary tried to think of a legal way to be rid of her deteriorating, impossible relationship with Darnley, without making her son illegitimate in the eyes of Catholic Europe. This really put Mary in a difficult situation, almost like being in chains. In October 1566, Mary headed down to Jedburgh for a Justice and Eyre circuit court, she being the judge as per her right. After returning to Jedburgh from a trip to Hermitage, she suffered an illness so severe that they thought she was dead due to her body going cold. She had many attacks where she would go days in a comatose state, then come out of it, start to recover, and then go comatose again. Darnley, ever the faithful husband, never came to her side. He knew what had happened, but never came. Sometime later, her doctor was able to bring her out of it by tightly binding her legs from the ankle up and her arms. He then forced her mouth open and poured wine down her throat. Surprisingly, she didn't choke. She then began to recover after severe vomiting of blood. The cause of the illness or attack is still debated to this day. After the Jedburgh event, Darnley was in Glasgow recovering from another bout of syphilis, while Mary was in Edinburgh. Mary knew she could not leave Darnley in Glasgow for long, the whole keep your friends close and enemies closer. Mary persuaded Darnley to come back to Edinburgh. Mary knew, like it or not, need it or not, want it or not, she was going to have to reconcile with Darnley to save the legitimacy of her son. Mary wanted Darnley to go to Craigmillar Castle, being it was safer for him. However, Darnley wanted to go to Kirklefield. Darnley knew he had a rap sheet of betrayal a mile long. Mary visited Darnley often, and she visited him the day before Kirklefield was turned into a rock pile. She went back to Holyrood later that night for a dear friend's wedding reception, and Holyrood was being made ready for Darnley's return in the morning. At 2 a.m. on the 10th of February, 1567, Edinburgh was rocked with an explosion that left Kirklefield officially a pile of rocks. Darnley was found with internal injuries and strangled to death in a garden. He was killed twice. Mary was not involved in the murder. She, like most monarchs, were in constant fear of their lives. I seriously doubt that she, or any monarch for that matter, would step foot in Kirklefield had they known it was packed with gunpowder. Mary always thought the explosion at Kirklefield was meant for her, not Darnley. The people who committed the murder were also the people who led the investigation in the court hearing. Needless to say, the investigation and the hearing were shoddy and poorly done. And later on, Mary was used as the scapegoat, since the Lords did not want the evidence pointed at them. They used Bothwell as well. He was not exactly in their good graces either. Bothwell also kept the evidence from convicting him by keeping Darnley's dad away from Edinburgh. After the murder, Mary went to Seaton Castle to take the air since she was feeling poorly, as was her norm. People who were watching her thought it strange that she would attend a wedding and play golf or Pall Mall so soon after her husband's death. In other words, she was not grieving the way they thought she should. People deal with grief in different ways and do not grieve the same every time. We will never fully know what Mary was feeling or thinking. Playing a game for her may have been a way for her to process emotions and work through things. She may very well have shut down due to shock. She had witnessed the murder of 2 people, and one of them right in front of her. She had a gun pointed to her pregnant abdomen. How could she not be in emotional shock? People in emotional shock have a difficulty believing what has happened and often feel detached from reality. Shock also affects how a person makes decisions, and those decisions may be unwise. They also tend to withdraw from people. Mary did these things, and even in Mary's time they had their own version of social media. Face Parchment, X Marks the Spot, Clock Talk, Instascream, Snapwords, Pony Express Mail, to name a few. People watched royals then as they do today. In Edinburgh, Bothwell got together at Ainsley's Tavern with the Lords of the Confederacy. They had dinner and a few pints. They drew up the Ainsley Tavern Bond, which they all signed. The bond stated that the Lords gave Mary permission to marry Bothwell and for Bothwell to be king. Yeah, well, we'll see how long this bond lasts before they change their allegiances. Personally, I give it to the end of the meeting. Bothwell showed the bond to Mary. Mary did not agree at first. In April 1567, Mary went to Stirling Castle to see her 10-month-old son. Little did she know it would be for the last time. On the return trip, she was abducted by Bothwell. Mary sent a dispatch to Edinburgh for help. Bothwell took the Queen to Dunbar Castle, and even in the presence of her enemies, Bothwell laid with the Queen against her will. I would call that a rape. By doing this, he forced her to marry him and agree with the Ainsley Tavern Bond. Mary's letter to Rome stated that she found his doings rude. Mary was not in love with Bothwell. On the 15th of May, 1566, Mary and Bothwell wed. Woo-hoo. It was a squalid event compared to Mary's previous 2 weddings. Mary loved weddings and loved gifting people and her husband. For Bothwell, all Mary gave him was the title of Duke of Orkney and here's a nice tux for you, dude. Deal. As for Mary, she had a black dress relined in gold taffeta. She did not go with her usual flair for a wedding dress by any means. At the dinner that night, someone asked Mary why she was not happy. She said, "I don't feel like being happy." The next day, the French ambassador Ducrot found Mary in the kitchen in a flood of tears, saying she was already repenting for her Protestant marriage. She was looking for a knife so she could plunge it into her heart. And if that didn't work, she was going to drown herself. Yeah, that sounds like a very happy and in-love bride. On the 15th of June, 1567, when Mary faced the Lords of the Confederacy at Carberry Hill, I would not be surprised if she was a little confused. The Lords signed a bond, and approved, of Mary marrying Bothwell. Now they tell her that they don't approve? Great. It's not like she can just undo a wedding on a whim. She did not want this wedding to begin with. What's wrong with you people? Make up your minds. Oh. Now she is a prisoner, and they take her to Edinburgh. Everyone now thinks she is a whore because the Lords changed their minds and set her people against her with propaganda because they don't want Bothwell to be king. Well, Mary has got news for them. She is pregnant with his child, and she did not want this child to be illegitimate. So they take Mary to Lochleven Castle in the middle of Lochleven that is under the control of her half-brother who conveniently wants her throne. When Mary got to Lochleven, she really did not feel like eating or drinking anything. She was worried about the safety of her life. The Lords kept nagging Mary to ditch Bothwell. She kept telling them no. By now, people were starting to see she was pregnant. In mid-July, nature released Mary from Bothwell. Mary miscarried twins that were buried on the island. As with the birth of James, Mary's health was again very poor, and she did ditch Bothwell. The Lords then decide that since Mary is feeling subpar, let's threaten her life to force her to abdicate her throne for her son, so that Mary's half-brother, the Earl of Moray, will be a Protestant regent of Scotland. Mary did abdicate. When Mary felt better, Mary did do a bit of cloak and dagger of her own, and with some help escaped Lochleven on a second attempt posing as a washerwoman. Sad to say, her freedom did not last long. Mary declared at Hamilton that her abdication and her consent to the coronation of James had been extorted from her under duress. An Act of Council was then passed declaring the whole process by which Moray had been appointed as regent treasonable. On the 13th of May, 1568, Mary lost at Langside. Due to the lack of military skill, the Queen's men crumbled. Great, just what she needed to win her throne back. Mary does not get to ride from the battle as a victor against her half-brother, but as Queen on the Lamb. Highlight of her day. While on the run, she shorns her head so she is less recognizable. From this time on, she does not regrow her hair out again as it was. She wears wigs for the rest of her life. She stays in people's homes, sleeps on the ground, drinks sour milk, living life, and having good times camping on the run. Mary makes it to the southern border. She now has to make the biggest decision of her life. Downside is, she does not have all the information of centuries of 2020 hindsight like we do today. Yeah, she could go back to France, which would take time and resources to accomplish. There was no guarantee that they would or could help her. France was embroiled in religious battles of their own, costing them large amounts of money. Her Guise family was also not in as much power as they once were. She could stay in Scotland, as her advisors pleaded her to do, but having lost 2 battles in a short period of time, she may have figured she needed a bit better army. Elizabeth did say in a letter that she would give Mary her full support at Lochleven. At Solway Firth, Mary gets in a fishing boat and crosses to England. Mary and Elizabeth were part of a huge religious war. It was the reason both Mary and Elizabeth were put in prison. It affected their relationship and how they dealt with each other. Religion was the reason Mary felt she was the rightful Queen of England and what she did to strengthen her claim. Religious contention was why Elizabeth had such a hard time gaining the throne. It also affected how she lived her life as a queen and the Spanish Armada. The plots made against both Elizabeth and Mary were due to religious factions. Religion was part of the reason Mary was forced to abdicate her throne. Yes, her half-brother James wanted to be regent and have the power, but also they wanted to keep Scotland a Protestant country. They felt that Mary would eventually change Scotland back to a Catholic country. and abdicating to James, they could now raise him Protestant instead of Catholic. Mary went to England for the aid that was promised her. She thought she was only going to be there for 2 or 3 weeks, and then be heading back to Scotland at the head of an army. Mary honestly and truly believed that Elizabeth would indeed support her and help her regain her throne. What Mary did not seem to know was how big a threat she was to Elizabeth. Again, back to the Mary was Catholic and Elizabeth Protestant shtick, and Mary's underlying never-ending desire to be Queen of England, which had been drummed into her head most of her life, which has been nothing but a royal headache, pun intended. When Elizabeth learned what the nobles in Scotland had done to Mary, she was going to help Mary. But with France, England, Spain, and Rome all knowing about Darnley's murder and Mary being suspected, thanks to Mary's nobles, Elizabeth would not meet with Mary until she had been purged of the stain of Darnley's murder. And this could only be done if Mary submitted to the judgment of Elizabeth. This angered Mary. She told Knowles, Elizabeth's messenger, that Maitland and Wharton assented to Darnley's murder. Elizabeth did not want to meet Mary out of fear of being guilty by association, more or less. No matter how much Mary pleaded with Elizabeth to meet her and tell her story face to face, Elizabeth would not meet Mary. They got as close as 70 miles from each other, but never met. And Mary was innocent the whole time. Back in Scotland, the people involved in Darnley's murder were going to make their fraudulent evidence stick to Mary like tar, no matter the cost. They forged all kinds of evidence, including the casket letters. Mary was put on trial in England more than once for the murder of Darnley. For most of the trials, Mary was never able to defend herself in person, and she never saw the evidence that was charged against her. Oh, and as for James, Earl of Moray, Mary's half-brother, his solo regency of Scotland did not do much better than Mary's entire reign. He was solo regent of Scotland from the 24th of July, 1567, to the 23rd of January, 1570. 3 years to her 6 years of personal reign. He was assassinated by James Hamilton, a supporter of Mary. James Stuart was fatally wounded by a carbine gunshot. He was the first head of government to be assassinated by firearm. As Mary was location hopping through England, her health started deteriorating. Elizabeth could not decide what to do with Mary, an anointed queen. Heaven forbid Elizabeth try and meet with Mary secretly to hear Mary's side of the story. In 1584, Mary proposed an association in which Mary and her son James would rule Scotland together. James turned down Mary's offer. This really hurt Mary emotionally. Elizabeth eventually cut off Mary's lines of communication. Walsingham, Elizabeth's spy master, opened up communication again using a hollowed-out bung, the cork of a beer barrel, to conceal messages. Walsingham then waited for Mary to incriminate herself. Walsingham introduced the bond of association, which made Mary guilty by association for any plots to free Mary and assassinate Elizabeth and put Mary on the English throne, whether Mary knew about the plot or not, or even approved them. Mary's trial at Fotheringay Castle was a farce. Mary defended herself admirably at the trial she was able to go to.
The most high and mighty Queen, Elizabeth, being not without grief of mind, advertised that you have conspired the destruction of her and of England and the subversion of our religion.
I came into England to crave aid, which had been promised me, and yet have I been kept in prison ever since, to my grievous wrong. I solemnly protest that I am no subject of my cousin, the Queen of England, nor can I be constrained to appear before your lordship or any other judge whatsoever for any cause whatsoever, save before God alone, the highest judge. This I protest, lest I should prejudice mine own royal majesty and my son and successors, as well as all other absolute princes. But now I appear personally to the end that I may refute the crimes objected against me. But I am not here to answer for any plot to set me at liberty, but for plots against the life of the Queen, my sister. You lay to my charge my letters to Babington, that I have conspired to slay Elizabeth. I defy you to show me a single word in them about Elizabeth, and then I shall allow you right to prosecute me.
This noble gentlemen, all my private friends, who for the zeal they bear to the Catholic cause and your Majesty's service, will undertake the tragical execution. The tragical execution. What say you to that, your Majesty? Does not that tragical execution mean that Babington plotted to murder the Queen of England, and, as he said, in your Majesty's service?
Whether Babington wrote this or no, I know not. Mayhap he did. But let it be proved that I received it. If Babington or any others affirm it, they lie openly. Other men's crimes are not to be cast upon me. I have not what the poorest criminal has, an advocate, someone to speak for him. And my judges are men who seek my ruin. Oh, you do me wrong, sir, in treating me in this fashion. Do not believe them when they say that I consented to the Queen's destruction. I would never make shipwreck of my soul by conspiring the destruction of my dearest sister. My lord, I bear no malice to anyone in this assembly. Finally, my lord, I require that I may be heard in full Parliament or in person speak to the Queen, my sister, and with the council. Yes, you have behaved rudely enough in your duty and have treated me too roughly for a person who is not accustomed to it, nor learned in the laws of chicanery. But God pardon you and keep me from having any more to do with you.
Elizabeth's Privy Council did not trust her. Neither did she trust them, just like Mary's Privy Council did not really trust her. Elizabeth procrastinated signing Mary's warrant. She told the messenger not to take the warrant to her council unless she said so, but she knew they would. Elizabeth could then blame the council and not have to take responsibility for it herself. Elizabeth wanted Mary dead, but she could not give the order. Elizabeth freaking out over the death of Mary was somewhat of an act. Elizabeth was not infallible. She could be noble, she could be jealous, and she could be kind, etc. Both Mary and Elizabeth's reigns were awash with contradictions. That is what makes these women so interesting. These powerhouse queens were always walking a razor's edge in their respective kingdoms. Elizabeth and Mary were both good rulers in their countries. Unfortunately, history tends to focus on Mary's mistakes only, and Elizabeth's good times. Quoting Scotland Unplugged, quote, "A lot of Mary and Elizabeth problems seem to have stemmed from the fact that they were women, surrounded by a bunch of dudes, with pointy beards and cunning plans," unquote. The religious Reformation faction for these two queens had more hang-ups than an abattoir. On the 7th of February, 1587, Mary was informed she would be executed at 8 a.m. the next morning. That night, Mary put all her affairs in order, including payments to her staff and where she wanted her body to be interned. She then prayed. At around 2 a.m. she laid down but did not sleep. She could hear the scaffolding being constructed in the great hall below her. She said her goodbyes to her staff and to her very faithful friend and hairdresser, Mary Seton. Mary Seton was one of the original 4 Marys. After Mary Stuart's death, Mary Seton was able to leave England. She lived the rest of her days in France at a convent owned by Mary Stuart's family. None of Mary Stuart, Queen of Scots' final wishes were carried out.
The throne of the great judge of heaven is laid open.
No, give me a brief.
Of all your life.
Please, Master King, trouble me not.
And the particular sentence.
I will not hear you. I am resolved in my own faith.
All the enemies of the
Please, Master King, you have nothing to do with me, but I will do.
All the enemies of the gospel.
None of yours, Dominic. I'll forgive you with all my heart. But I hope this death should give an end to my trouble. No!
In nomine Patris, Filii, et Spiritus.
Lord, have mercy on this sinner. We pray, according to the Reformed prayer, that thou, Lord, gives help
in manus tuas, Domine, confide animi
Lord,
in manus tuas.
Stay within us, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost.
I shed my blood for the ancient Catholic religion.